Perspective welcomed a panel of lobbyists. L.T. McCrimmon, who served as the Director of Legislative Affairs for Governor Roy Cooper, and Laura DeVivo, the founder of the DeVivo Group, which is an independent lobbying organization that primarily works on environmental and education policy. We also welcomed the Vice President of Governmental Affairs for the Independent Insurance Agents of North Carolina, Joe Stewart, as a guest moderator. Our guests discussed everything from how lobbying works to key pieces of legislation they have fought for and even hostage negotiations. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Hi there, I'm Joe Stewart. I've been with you a few times before. Very fortunate today to have two great colleagues of mine who are lobbyists, people that work with state legislators, have clients that have particular interests that come before the North Carolina General Assembly. And they both have great experience in both the legislative and executive branch of state government. I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to talk a little bit about how the legislative process works and what the role of a lobbyist is. You have probably a lot of misconceptions about that expression. In fact, the word lobbyist is reputed to have been coined by President Grant. When Grant was in the White House, they were doing renovations, and so Grant would leave the grounds of the White House and walk across the street to the Willard Hotel, which is right across from where the White House is in Washington, and would drink in the bar there. And at that time, every single employee of the federal government was an employee of the president. They all had to be hired by the president. And so people seeking federal jobs, knowing the president was coming to the hotel, would line the walls of the lobby of the hotel in the hopes that they could catch the president as he came through. And it was Grant that started to call these people lobbyists. There's a very different sense of what they were there to try to accomplish than what those of us that are lobbyists today do. But let's, as a starting point, have each of our panelists introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their background and the experience they have before the time now that they work as a lobbyist.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Go ahead and say it again. Good afternoon. My name is L.T. McCrimmon. I have been in this world of lobbying since 22, essentially, but before then, I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked for Congressman Bob Etheridge, did that for 5 years, which is very interesting and very different from working in state government level of lobbying. But then also I worked for Governor Cooper as his legislative director. And so now I work for a company called APCO. We're a global advisory firm, and I've had several different clients that have a multitude of issues that I have to become a jack of all trades of and go down and talk to our General Assembly and hopefully get some legislation either enacted in a law or changing some pieces of legislation, or changing some laws to help benefit those clients and what they need to ensure that their business is staying strong.
Good afternoon. I'm Laura DeVivo. I'm from the last century. I feel like you're all from this century, so I feel like I need to say that. But I've been working in and around state government since 1994. When I got out of college, I went to Washington, D.C. and worked for the North Carolina governor. All governors have a presence in Washington to try to coordinate the state's federal effort. North Carolina doesn't do a great job of coordinating our congressional delegation all the time. Not everybody gets along, but that was my job then, mostly answering the phone and doing stuff like that. But it was pretty fun. And then Joe Stewart hired me to come to North Carolina and work with him in one of the executive agencies. I worked in another agency as well. Then I was hired to work for the House Democratic Caucus leader as his chief of staff. He became Speaker of the House. That was a nice 8-year run. And then I became a lobbyist in 2011. And first at a law firm, which is an interesting experience, very different than working in-house at a company or working on your own. And then I started my own lobbying firm with a partner and continue to do that starting in 2016. I currently represent 9 clients who I lobby for. I lobby the General Assembly and I lobby the executive branch of government, mostly the Department of Education, sometimes the governor, sometimes the Attorney General, and then sometimes LT. And then I have a number of clients who I advise but don't lobby for. That's important. Lobbying is a specific regulated activity, and there are clients for whom I do not ever do that specific regulated thing, but offer them advice, help them schedule meetings, figure out what they want to do, and then kind of empower them to do it. And it's great to be here with you today.
So, Laura, we'll start with you.
Start with me.
What is describe what is the day-to-day life of a lobbyist like? When you have clients, what does that mean? You meet with the clients, and then strategy and the specific things you're doing on their behalf with legislative and executive branch agencies.
I'm not ready to answer that question. My clients are in a variety of areas. So I have some education clients, some environmental advocacy type clients, some technology clients. And so my day starts the night before my day. And I look at the calendars, I read the news, and I try to see what's scheduled to happen and guess what's going to happen on behalf of any client I have. Right now, or at least for the past couple of years with this General Assembly comes into office with a lot of ideas about what they want to do. They're not reacting as much to the things we're asking them to do. They have an agenda. And we live, our bread and butter is advising them of how they may be helping or hurting our clients, educating them on the full impact of what they want to do. And then we kind of earn our living correcting the little unintended consequences of what they do. So a good 50% of my time is spent managing my client, which is, I know you want this, but it's not going to happen. Or you don't really want to say that in public, or you have a great idea, but there's no one to hear that idea right now, or this is a great idea, we're going full bore on this idea, we're going to get it done, here's how we're going to do it. So then we create a strategy of who we're going to talk to, who's going to be our best advocate. Say we're going to pick a legislator to manage our idea, kind of run with it. We want to pick someone who's on the right committee, who's respected, or a new person who's super energetic, and then create a pathway and an expectation. We need to be nimble, and you get knocked down every single day. You got to be able to get back up the next day.
Now, LT, you have a very particular experience. You were the lobbyist for the governor. So you were representing the elected chief executive of the state of North Carolina and their legislative priorities. How does that differ from the type of lobbying that you do now?
That is a very good question. So the beauty of working for the governor, you're representing all of North Carolina, all 10.5 million people. And so at the end of the day, you have to think about what is best for the state and what is best for those individuals that live within our border. And so oftentimes, there will be a slew of bills that were introduced. One of my biggest piece of being the legislative director for the governor was to really become a part of the House and Senate caucuses and understanding what the legislators were thinking as this legislation was rolling out, understanding the impact it's going to have on everyday citizens, but then also not going in with a partisan mindset, going with how do we bridge the gap? How do I work with the Republicans, with the Democratic governor? So I work within a divided government. And how do we work together as one unit to move forward the state? And so working for the governor, it was not an easy task. I always felt like I was putting out fire alarm fires every single minute. But we were able to accomplish a lot of good work because I established a good rapport with all of the members of the General Assembly, regardless of their party. Because when I walked in the door, I told them all the time, yes, I work for the governor, but we work for the state of North Carolina.
Right. Now, you have the perspective, too, of having worked on Capitol Hill as well as work in Raleigh. What are the major differences in terms of how lobbying occurs in Congress versus the North Carolina General Assembly?
Sure. So working on Capitol Hill, coming back to the state was a culture shock for me. One of the biggest things I always tell people, when you work on Capitol Hill, lobbyists just don't walk up to the members of Congress. They have to go through their staff first. But coming to North Carolina, coming back home, so let me say that, coming back home, I walk into the General Assembly, I realized they don't have a staff in DC, as they do in DC, like 9 or 10 people that you must work through in order to get to that member. In the General Assembly, you get to know the actual member, which is, I think, from my experience, is a better outcome because you get to know who that legislator is, you get to know their community, their districts that they represent, and you understand what's meaningful to them. And so that actually helped me a lot in the work that I did for the governor, because I got to know these members on a one-on-one basis, become friends with a lot of them, hang out with them, know who their family members are. So you build a rapport, and they understood that all I had is my word. So I'm telling y'all this now, if you tell somebody you're going to do something, do it. If not, tell them up front. And that is what gained me a lot of respect within the General Assembly. So when I had to come to members with really tough issues, they knew that I only had good intentions,
Right.
and that we can work together. So that is the biggest difference from, in my experience of working on Capitol Hill as well as working at the General Assembly.
And now, Laura, when you worked for Speaker Hackney, you were helping craft what the policy agenda was of the leadership of the House in the North Carolina General Assembly. So you were interacting with lobbyists from a different perspective, people that were coming to you with the ideas of their clients or the needs and desires of their clients. So how did that part of it play into the determinations of what the priorities of the leadership of the House were when you were on staff?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So as a staff member, the only way to make policy in the General Assembly is to vote, and I never voted. So I could run around and say I was whoever I was all day long, but it sort of didn't matter unless I was speaking on behalf of another member. So at that time, the House Democrats had a process for establishing priorities, and I was just an agent of the leadership in that way. So there was a long process for coming up with those priorities. It was a democratic process. People closed the door and yelled at each other, and some people won and some people lost. In that caucus, we had a really conservative member and a really liberal member, and we never concluded a caucus without making time for the two of them to yell at each other. And then they would come out as friends, and the needle would be moved just a little bit in one direction because of them. And I guess that's it. I want to jump to LT for 1 second. Under LT's leadership, one of the most important things that's happened in North Carolina in a very long time happened, and that's the expansion of the Medicaid program. And Governor Cooper ran on this at the beginning of his 8-year term, and the Republican legislator fought him and fought him and fought him. And because LT could go into the offices of people who didn't want to talk to the governor and have hard conversations about how this actually is something that's good for North Carolina, and convince people who woke up every day and said, I will never do this, convince them to ultimately do it, it's one of the most important things that's happened. And she doesn't beat her chest at all, so I'm here to beat her chest for her. It's really one of the most important things that's happened in North Carolina in 20 years. And you guys, we all owe a lot to her for doing that, because if she hadn't have been there, we would still be trying to figure out what to do in North Carolina.
Well, my next question was to share a success from your lobbying
That's her
experience.
success.
So, Laura, maybe share a success from your own
I would
lobbying
like to share a
experience.
failure. That's okay.
That was the next question. So share a success
I
first.
have a fantastic failure. It is, and it sort of boils down to what my character is and what my word means. And that is, I was trying to enact a bill about sedimentation control. And there was a legislator in Eastern North Carolina from Elizabeth City, and he would look at me and say, sedimentation control, it's flat where I live. No sediment moves. We have high tide, but here I was trying to do my best for the Piedmont, I guess. And he kept blocking me. He kept getting my bill off the committee calendar. And so one day he was absent. I was like, let's go. So we ran that bill through everything that day. And I went home feeling great about myself. And the next day it was like my name reverberating off buildings, not in a good way. And he said, come to my office. And I came in there and he said, I wasn't here. You ran your bill. You knew I hated it. I killed your bill. Your bill's dead. It's so dead. And so I had to go back to my boss and say, well, yesterday was a great day, but today's the worst day ever. And, I'm going to go home and sulk. And so then I got a phone call from that legislator, and he said, come back to my office. I guess he wasn't done whipping on me. So I went back in there and I said, you're right. I thought about it. I shouldn't have done that. And I apologize. I should never do anything like that. The people of North Carolina, you represent, people in North Carolina, and they disagree with what I'm doing, and we deserve to have our fight in the open. And you weren't there, and I took advantage of that. And I don't know how to make it up to you. And then he called me the next day and said, I'm only going to kill half of your bill. What half do you want to pass? And I was like, well, I want the good half to pass. So we agreed that we would pass half of my bill, which, by the way, that bill we tried for years and never gotten anywhere. And so that bill got passed, and I got invited to borrow his vacation home in the Dominican Republic. So I'm here to say that it really is personal relationships, the ability to own your mistakes, to have your reputation in the open. One of the most important things that I've done is allow people to openly see when I've made a mistake and what I do about it. And I think that that's been great for my reputation. I think, LT sort of nibbled around that same kind of, not that situation, but kind of what it means. But that was a real spectacular failure I had. Everybody saw it. It was so embarrassing. But now I kind of look back and laugh and think of that as a moment where I changed as a person.
A success.
Nah.
All right, we've heard one success, another success, and another failure.
I think yes, I pushed, so let me back up. Medicaid expansion is more of a failure and a success for me. So yes, I fought tooth and nail. I groveled. I did whatever I had to do because I thought about the millions of people in this state, that are underinsured or not insured at all. And I'm from Scotland County, from a rural part of the state, and I would go home and I would see these individuals who are struggling to make ends meet. And I was grateful that I had health care insurance. My mother used to work for Campbell Soup, so she always had employer-based health care. But when my mother retired to take care of my grandparents, she lost her health insurance. So this was something that was very important to me. And so let me back up a little bit. When I worked on the Hill for Congressman Bob Etheridge, that's when they started talking about this thing called healthcare reform. So I've been a part of the Affordable Care Act from the inception, so I saw it implemented across the country, and I would come home to North Carolina, and I didn't see the people reaping the benefits of all the hard work that we had done in Congress. So for me, that was a big failure. And so I fought tooth and nail, got it to like the 2-yard line, and then I left the governor. And then he signed it the next session. But so I see that as a failure, and I see that as a success because I saw the hard work that we all did as a collective unit in a state that said, no, we're not going to do it. And they changed minds and said, you know what, this is a good thing for our community. But I think one of my other big successes that I'm very proud of, during Governor Cooper's 8-year tenure as governor of the state, he had never signed a budget. And I told the governor when he asked me to come back to his office.
Now you should explain what that means, that he's never signed a budget.
So when Governor Cooper was elected in 2016, the General Assembly had passed legislation that basically said we can have a continuing resolution, a CR. So if the governor did not sign a budget that the General Assembly passed or he vetoed it, we will continue to operate at the same base level of financing that the state currently had. And so it was important that the governor worked with the General Assembly, in my mind, to get a new budget on the books, and that was 21 to 23 budget year, when they're biennial budgets, so you do it for 2 years, consecutive 2 years. However, for me to get the Big Five, and I call it the Big Five, that's the governor, the Senate Pro Tem, the Speaker, the minority leader of the Senate and the minority leader of the House all together in one room, and to actually hash out their differences. And so for me, it's very important that if you don't agree with somebody, that's okay. But it's not okay not to sit down and have a conversation. And by me getting those 5 men in that one room, I took control. And I said, listen, you all represent your different interests, but at the end of the day, all of us are interested in what's best for North Carolina. And so we were able to get a budget that the governor signed, and it's honestly the only budget that Governor Roy Cooper signed in his tenure as governor. So that is something I'm so proud of, but I worked so hard for that. I was over them at the end of the day.
It is one of the things people don't think of, but oftentimes the role that the lobbyist plays is to figure out what two different parties who disagree on many, many different things can agree on relative to a specific thing. What are some of the ways that you think people perceive what a lobbyist does that are not actually what a lobbyist does?
Have y'all seen House of Cards? So I think that
We don't kill people.
Yeah,
we really generally don't kill people.
Bury the bodies. Really, in North Carolina, I would say that our job is really, at this moment, is to educate. And if you're a good lobbyist, then you say, this is what my client wants. This is the problem that it solves, either for my client or for the state of North Carolina or for you. And this is who I'm fighting against. They believe something different, and this is what they're going to say about it. And so I think that's the best way to kind of talk about what we do. We used to do a lot of vote counting, which is, you need a majority of votes to pass something, and we would try to figure out where everybody was and put together the numbers. And it's become less important as the leadership has the leadership caucuses sort of are more disciplined, and they agree behind closed doors what they're going to do as a group. So it's harder to peel off a couple of members to have them support you if the leadership caucus isn't going to support you. So I would say it's changing all the time. I used to love to count votes, and I'm so bad at math, but the vote counting was the one math that I could do that. There's just not that much need for it anymore. The other thing that I think people don't really understand is there's a handful of bills where everybody's fighting. But for the most part, legislation passes the House and the Senate almost unanimously. And it really is about moving the state forward or fixing a problem that everybody agrees we have with a solution that everybody thinks we should use. Very rarely are there fireworks and fights and shutdowns. There's one thing that's been happening in the past, 10 years that's been interesting, and that is that either the House or the Senate. So I remember a long time ago when the Republicans took control of the House and the Senate, but the governor was a Democrat. I remember the chief of staff of the Republican speaker saying to me, it turns out that the governor is our adversary and the Senate is the enemy. And so I think really that watching the House and Senate try to figure out how to get along that's the real show. And it's interesting because all of you in here have a House member, a representative, and a senator. Like, they all represent the same. I mean, the state is sort of blanketed. You have one of each. And so every senator represents also people who are represented by House members, and the same for the House. So it's pretty weird that they don't work as well together. They never have, but it's pretty weird that they don't. What we're starting to watch are hostage situations. So the House will have a bill that it really wants, some members really want it, and the Senate will say, the House will pass it, it'll go to the Senate will just hold it hostage to get something they want. And it really is, a hostage negotiator would be an appropriate person to bring into the process. There have been bills that have been sitting out there for years because medical marijuana is stuck, and gambling in casinos is stuck, and what else is stuck? There's a lot that's stuck and that's being held hostage. Once that log jam is broken, I have no idea what all will pass, but a lot.
So LT, what do you consider some of the important skill sets and abilities and talents of a lobbyist? What are the best characteristics for someone who wants to be a lobbyist?
The first thing I'll say is be truthful. If members know that they can trust you, they're more willing to sit down and have a conversation with you. Two, stay focused and stay true to your core principles. Don't compromise who you are as a person because you've got a client that you may not agree with, and you're like, I fundamentally do not agree with this. Never compromise who you are. And people will see that. They believe in genuine interactions with their lobbyists, because I can only speak for myself and my interactions with members. I've got friends on both sides of the aisle, and people can never understand how can the governor's legislative director walk into the General Assembly and you've got Ralph Heiss, who is a Republican from Western North Carolina, standing on the second floor yelling, LT, what's going on? And everybody will stop and stare at me like, what just happened here? But it came down to me being who I am. I stay true to myself. I like to laugh, and they know I'm gonna crack a joke really quickly, because A, it lessens the tension, and two, they know that I'm coming in true honesty, and it's peace. And I just want to find a way to work together and move forward. And that's one thing I think people feel that lobbyists don't do. They feel like lobbyists are just being underhanded and sneaky and trying to just, get nothing but profit so they can get rich and keep people poor. But that's not true. We all work together for the benefit, A, of our state, or A, for the benefit of our client, and try to stop bad things from happening.
One of the questions that people often ask is why would somebody need a lobbyist? So if I had a company and there was a regulatory system challenge that was causing a lot of additional expense to my business, didn't seem to make sense to me, and I wanted to try to change it just to make it possible for my company to be more profitable. Why can't I just go down to the legislature and get that resolved? Why do I need to hire a lobbyist to do that?
So one thing I have learned now that I'm in this current role at APCO and I'm no longer representing the state, I've learned that a lot of companies just don't know how to talk to government officials. They try to go and talk to them as if they're a CEO. And you can't go into a legislator's office and say, this is what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and when you're going to get it done by. You got to realize these people are duly elected by the people of their districts across the state. You've got to go in with a little bit of respect. And then you also got to understand and break it down to those members of why this is important to not only their districts, but to their state, of why we need this change done. Because a lot of times it's going to impact jobs. It may bring more jobs to the state. So like your parents work for, your parents may own companies. It'll impact them directly. It impacts you directly. So having someone who can go in, navigate the General Assembly or navigate Congress or executive branch, knowing who the right people are to talk to get something done, A, you'll see it go quicker. B, you'll help them miss a lot of landmines, because some people will go in like the bull in the china shop, and now you put yourself in a worse predicament than you were when you first started. So that's why it's important to have a lobbyist.
I think we have some time for questions. We'd open it up to the floor. Anybody have a particular question? You want to take the mic so that they can be heard on the podcast? A very old student.
Yes, a very old. Yeah, she was just speaking. Yes, exactly. I am. I'm Generation X. You were speaking of, alluded to this and everything. I just want some details. What about access? Here's the thing: is how does it? Can you kind of speak about specifically, like, there's different groups out here that are trying to be represented by lobbyists, special interests, businesses, political entities. Is it like how do you get to the queue? How does that kind of like work? And are some can some of you have access to get in like a little bit more than others? How does that work?
So yeah, the access is a big deal, and it's not seedy or nefarious. It's a lot of it's just personal relationships, but. So I was just thinking about this when we were talking. I'm just an old dog. I've been in state government for a long time, and I know a lot of people. And so there are people so Governor Stein, my relationship with him is kind of special because we were in second grade together. But also then he, I saw him in Raleigh and he said, I'm thinking I might run for the Senate. And I was like, Josh, that's great, because I get to call him Josh because we were in second grade. And then he ran for the Senate, and I had a little fundraiser for him at my little junky house, and we raised $800 probably, and then he ran for the Senate. He's a great senator, and then he was going to run for Attorney General, and now he's governor, and I can text him because I've known him forever. So, and I was thinking about that too. Because I've been in government and around government, like LT, and I've been part of these programs where government officials from other states get together. I have classmates from a fellowship program I did 15 years ago who two are chief justices of their state Supreme Courts, and 3 are governors in other states. And so part of it is your reputation that you that you have when you start out as a young person, these people are growing up with you. And so when you look at all of these folks who are in really important roles now, well, we knew them, when they were baby legislators, when we were baby lobbyists or baby officials. But specifically the access question, everybody has access in the State House and the State Senate. You can walk in that door, you have to go through a metal detector, you've got to leave your weapons outside, and you can see whose office is where, and you can knock on that door and you can ask for a meeting, or you can grab somebody in the hall, the lobby. And as a private citizen, that is your right to do, and you may feel like it's an obligation to do, and that's totally fine. What we can do is we know actually who you need to talk to based on what your issue is. We can get our phone call answered quickly because we see them all the time. We know, I know where their assigned parking places are. I know where they sit on the House floor, the Senate floor. I know where they like to go eat dinner on Tuesdays. I know what grocery store they go to because I've been here forever and I just remember where I see them. Just like you all know a lot about each other because you've been around each other day in and day out for a long time.
Anything you want to add?
No, I think she did good.
Yeah, question?
I heard you talk about hostage situations within Congress. Is there anything as a lobbyist you can do for your client when their legislation is in a hostage situation, or is it just a sit and wait game?
So for me, when your bill is in a hostage situation, this is again, go sit down and talk to the member that's holding you up. What are your issues with the legislation? How can we work together? What changes do you want to see? I believe in building a coalition too. When people start getting a lot of outside pressure from groups that they respect, and listen, I am not above sending your pastor to come talk to you at the grocery store or sending your doctor to talk to you in church. There's a multitude of ways to get things done and accomplished. You just got to know which strings to pull to get that situation unstuck.
Yeah, I think I would just add, it's like any other hostage negotiation. You got to figure out what the sides are willing to accept to move on the thing that they're bound on. And sometimes for all three of us that have worked in the executive branch, when the legislator's holding up something that's important to your particular agency, it could be because of some frustration or concern they have about some function in your agency. So you'd have to work through that issue with them till they're satisfied so that they'll let the legislation go. It's the reason why we call it a hostage situation is it's exactly like a hostage situation. So.
I remember a hostage situation in particular where a bill was being held up for a reason completely unrelated to anything about the bill at all. It was my client's bill and I was the lobbyist, but they knew that I had a relationship with someone who could make something else happen unrelated. And so it was really about me. It was really a not very nice way of asking me to go have a conversation with somebody else about something else. So figuring out why you have a hostage situations, I recommend that as your first step.
Only thing I would add is, unlike real hostage situations, sometimes in the legislative process, hostage situations occur about things that aren't important. You're only taken hostage as a person if you're valuable. Sometimes it's really unvaluable things that are taken hostage legislatively.
Will you take in clients that you morally disagree with? And if so, how do you navigate that?
I guess I've been lobbying the longest, so I've done all of the good things and all of the bad things. A couple things about that. So you have to draw a bright line about what it is you will and won't stand for. But I think one of the things that I found, I took on a client once when I worked at a law firm. The law firm required me to do work for law firm clients, and sometimes you don't necessarily agree with everything that they would like you to do. But one of the things that I've learned is they don't always know exactly what they want to do. They don't always understand how it will be how that ask will be perceived. Part of my job is to manage my client, which isn't to tell them what they do and don't want, but to tell them, you know, this is how this is going to be received, and you may want to rethink that. This may be the wrong time. You may be the wrong voice to ask for that. And I have some clients who are really, really far to one. They're really far. And they're really far on the left as environmental clients, environmental advocacy clients. It's a terrible time in North Carolina to be advocating for environmental improvements. And one of the things I say to them is, so part of what we need to do is be training the people who support us, the legislators who support us, to vote for us, even though the votes don't make a difference right now. Because our best supporters have begun to say, well, we can't win this, so I'm just going to vote with the majority on this issue. And they create this voting pattern that makes the members of, in this case, the Sierra Club, believe that there isn't anyone who cares about what the Sierra Club is doing. And that's just not true. There are a lot of people who care very much about it. So just training the legislators who support the Sierra Club, you know, in their speeches, and who the Sierra Club supports, you know, who the membership reaches out to, they attend their events, they send them letters, they congratulate them on things. Training them to never forget that they believe in the Sierra Club's core principles is an important thing to do. So some of the things that they want to do, I don't agree with, but it's not that I don't think they're good things to do. It's that you can't afford the time, my time, that it would take to fight that fight, and we can't win. So I think that's more of the answer.
Stay true to yourself. You know, that's kind of how I approach this thing, a call of life. This is how I approach this thing of lobbying. There's just certain things like my mom instilled in me that I'm just not gonna go against. So that's you evaluate that on case by case basis, and so. And I think all three of us, and I hate to speak for you all stand for something. And you're not gonna fall for it because somebody's gonna throw a check in your face. Because now you don't have any integrity. And integrity means a lot in this business.
Other questions?
Thank you. Hello, I'm Daniel Patterson. It's quite clear that you guys have had a lot of hands-on experience on CIS, and that those have been really beneficial for our state as a whole. Would you guys say you have more power being maybe an elected official or being a lobbyist? Where do you think more of that power lays, and where can you make the biggest difference, so to speak?
Well, I'll start with this one. It's interesting. I worked as the chief deputy state treasurer up until 2005, and I left to take a job as a lobbyist. And the thing that was remarkable to me was recognizing that a lot of the legislators that I talked to did not understand the legislative process as well as I did, and many of them did not have access to the leadership of the legislature as I did. And so to some extent, you know, power really originates from the point that you have control over the flow of particular pieces of legislation. The finance chair becomes a very powerful position when the legislature is talking a lot about taxation, because that flows through the finance committee. Appropriations chairs have a tendency to be very powerful because that's the flow of money in the budget. But given a particular session or given a particular issue, who has the power? And again, if it's 120 members of the state house, if for whatever reason there's 3 that are undecided on an issue and everyone else is split evenly, those 3 become very powerful because of that one situation that they find themselves in. But other observations?
I'll say this. I think it's a play-by-play situation. It depends on where you sit in the process. If you're an elected official, yes, you got power. You automatically start with power. But as Joe just alluded to, they don't always talk to each other. They don't always work well with each other. But then, for instance, I work for the governor. I will walk into the door automatically. I've got power because I do represent the chief executive of the state. But then, Laura, you have power because you know all the members. And so it's all about how we work together in unison, because the power shift always changes regardless who is in power.
That brings me to just another thought. Lobbyists and liaison. So a liaison is a lobbyist who works for an agency of the state government. So LT was a liaison before she was a lobbyist. So we get a lot of work done before we go talk to the legislators. We'll talk. She'll come to me and say, I've got this issue, you got a client, they might have a problem with this piece, can you run it by them? Instead of us having our fight in public, let's get together on this and then let's fight together as a coalition. I mean, she mentioned coalitions earlier, and there's a lot of power in that, honestly. I felt like I had the most information when I was chief of staff to the speaker. The Senate chief of staff would whisper things in my ear. We would kind of know what each other was doing. We would go meet in the governor's office with the governor's legislative liaisons at the same time. I felt like I had all the information. Also, all of the members of the House treated me as a confidant. I mean, sometimes it was bad. Sometimes I'm on vacation and they're saying, where are you? I have to make a decision and you're not telling me what to do. Well, I don't tell you what to do, but I felt like I had a lot of information then. And really the fun part of that was watching the news articles and saying, that's so close to being a perfect article. They missed this one. You know, how could they not see that this thing happened? But I felt like that because I knew more than the public knew, I felt like I was in a I'm not sure powerful position is exactly, I didn't get to exert my power, but I felt like I just knew a lot more. Now I'm just trying to get my work done for my clients and maintain my friendships and my working relationships. And it's a full-time job and it's a lot of fun.
This young lady gets to ask a question.
She gets the question.
I will, before you ask your question, I will tell you a story. Lyndon Johnson used to tell this story. He was Senate Majority Leader, very powerful politician in the country back in the 1950s. And he was at a banquet, and the busboy was coming around and putting butter on the bread plates. And Johnson said, hey, I like butter. Give me a whole bunch of butter on my bread plate. And the busboy said, I'm sorry, sir, they told me everybody gets one pat of butter. And Johnson said, do you know who I am, son? And the busboy said, no, sir, I don't, because I'm Lyndon Johnson. I'm the Majority Leader of the United States Senate and arguably one of the most powerful politicians in this entire country, and I like a lot of butter. And the busboy said, oh, I did not know that. He said, well, sir, do you know who I am? And Johnson said, no. He said, I'm the guy putting the butter on the bread plate and you get one pat. That's power. Johnson said, that's power. If you're controlling the butter, it doesn't matter who the person is. You can say whether they get one pat or not. So power is always very relative. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. Wow, that was really bad. So you may have already touched on this, but I was just wondering, among all of the policies and issues that you've advocated for, what was your favorite one and what did you learn from it?
This is an issue I worked on for a long time, and it's been unwound, but it was really important. It has to do with capital punishment in North Carolina. We have a death penalty, and a long time ago in the last century, when someone was charged in a capital case, meaning the death penalty was on the table, the way that the lawyers who were prosecuting, the lawyers defending, the way they had to share the information they had was secret, and so not everybody had access to all the same information. So if you've been accused of killing someone and they want to execute you, you didn't know what their argument was, you maybe don't have a lot of resources, you maybe can't hire a lawyer, you've got a public defender. Public defenders are great lawyers, they have too many cases and they don't get paid anything. There are a lot of other things going on too. What we did in North Carolina was enact the Racial Justice Act. I thought it was really important. What it did was allow for Michigan State to do a research project and look at statistics to see if you were a racial minority, whether you were X times more likely to have been found guilty of a death penalty case versus a majority person. And if you were, and from that, you were allowed to file another appeal that allowed them to look at the statistics, and the death penalty could be taken off the table. You don't get out of jail, you stay there forever. But I thought it was really important because I thought that we were not being fair in how we were treating these people. And the result was people were being executed, and so I lost a lot of sleep over that. There was a legislator at the time whose child was kidnapped and executed. Sorry, she was kidnapped and killed, and they found the person who did it, and that person was executed. He was a real believer in the death penalty, but he also believed that it was not applied, I think, uniformly. I don't think it's fair to also uniformly. And so he supported this legislation. I thought that was an important thing. So everybody on death row at that time, I think everybody but two, filed one of those additional appeals for the statistics to be examined. I thought that was just really important, not only because of what it did, because it shed light on a process that hadn't been fair.
Just quick, staying on the topic of criminal justice reform. I learned over time that when women who were incarcerated who were pregnant, they were shackled to the bed while they gave birth. And so one of the things that I swayed Governor Cooper and others to do with help from other advocates on the outside was to help pass an anti-shackling bill for incarcerated women, because let's just be honest, I see some women here who have had children. You're not going anywhere. But it's also giving these women a bit of dignity as they're bringing their children into this world. So that was something I was very passionate about, and I'm glad I got a chance to work on getting done.
I think that's our time. Help me in thanking our panelists today. Great job. Great conversation. Thank all of you for stepping by.
Thanks so much for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation. A big thanks to all three of our panelists for helping us with the event. The podcast is directed by Spencer Bluth. Our producer is Stanley Tirtara Harja. Our event manager is Colton Hankins. Our photographer is Kyle Sundquist. Our social media manager is Zain Abdelbeki. Our staff sponsor is Elizabeth Godwin.